Good.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll get started. I'd like to welcome you here, and we are delighted to host Jill Dougherty. I know you know her. You've seen her many, many times on CNN. She is, of course, their foreign affairs correspondent. She travels constantly and does very interesting reportage from around the world. She also, I have to say, is a student in the liberal studies program here, getting a master's degree, and happens to be also working on Russia in that. So she, of course, went to Moscow. She covered the elections, and she's going to give us some of her impressions. I think show us some of her clips, and she's also had some follow-up, I think, with some of the people that she saw during the election period. So we're delighted to have you, Jill.
Oh, thank you very much, Angela. I know we have roughly an hour, and I guess we do half and half.
Sure.
I'll talk for like maybe 20, 25 minutes, and then I'd love to get some questions, so we can get that going. I brought some pieces that I did during the election, and they're short, so I'll kind of perhaps sprinkle them throughout our chat here. Angela said, well, in a way that, maybe we could get into where we're going, what happened and where we're going. And this also will be the subject for a paper that I'm writing. And this is a good kind of exercise to concentrate my thoughts and try to understand exactly what I did see and experience, and I think that's going on in Russia during this period. Everyone I talk to, however, says that they agree that it's very difficult to get your hands around exactly what is going on. I mean, everyone agrees that there's change, whether you're a Putin supporter, whether you're a member of the opposition or support the opposition, but nobody seems to be able to say, is it long-lasting change, is it temporary change, and if it is change, what kind of change is it? Where are we going? So those are kind of the questions that I asked myself as I went through about a week there of covering the election. And I think everybody here probably, if you're at this talk, you probably know about the election, but just to remind us, it happened on March 4th, and there were 5 candidates, and of course Vladimir Putin, the main one, and he came out with, remember early on there was a question, will he be elected in the first round? He was going to be elected, but would he be elected in the first round or the second round? And he actually got 63.6% of the vote, so a sizable proportion, in fact I think more than people expected. And that's significant as we go along in this tale. The second person was the head of the Communist Party, Zyuganov. Communist Party, I think, is interesting because there's still life in it in some ways. In fact, there are some rumors about a younger leftist kind of getting involved and maybe leading it eventually. Ooh, that's soft, but we'll see. Then you had Prokhorov, Mikhail Prokhorov, who's the billionaire businessman, as he's referred to. I love that phrase. And then Zhirinovsky, good old Zhirinovsky, the head of the Liberal Democratic Party, and then finally, maybe not so aptly named, Liberal Democratic Party, and then finally Sergei Mironov, who I think bears an uncanny resemblance to somebody who was related to the Tsar. I've always thought that, with the beard, he kind of had, anyway, he did not do well, 3.8%. Now, I went to the press briefing from the OSCE, the Office for Security and Cooperation, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that monitored the elections. And it is important to point out, they refused to say whether they were free and fair, but they did say that they were not particularly free, or I guess you could almost say, or fair, because what they found was overall things had improved even since the parliamentary elections, which sparked a lot of those demonstrations. But they also said that there were procedural irregularities, and I have a piece. In fact, I think we will try to find that piece and play it for you. Yeah, I call it Measures Taken. And there are a variety. Oops, that's just a live shot. Let me just go over to controversies around this to see how these again. This is television. Audio? I'll move it back. Oh, is that the only speaker? Can anybody hear that? Is that the maximum for volume? I'll move it back. Yeah. So that's maximum. Okay. Well, let me just pull this back.
Just off Red Square, the Vladimir Putin Victory Park, a slick celebration organized by a Kremlin-linked youth group. Not far away, Putin's critics rally, intent on moving forward with their opposition plan, in spite of his win with almost 64% of the vote. When it was over, police moved in with force to remove those who would flee. Police say several hundred protesters were arrested in Moscow.
Thanks to the overwhelming majority of our voters, we achieved a complete victory.
Mr. Putin claims he won fair and square, but European observers monitoring the vote say the election process was skewed in his favor.
There was no real competition. It was not a level playing field and abused executive power, as well as the inappropriate use of administrative resources, ensured that the ultimate winner of the election was narrowly done.
One example, ballot box stuffing. A volunteer at a Moscow polling place explains there are other means of voter manipulation. Sometimes it's just money, sometimes it's fear of being fired, she tells me. There are many ways to do it so that on the surface it looks legal, but it's absolutely not. Sunday, at the high-tech Central Election Commission, the vote tally comes in. Vladimir Putin's numbers steadily rising. Just a few minutes away at a smoke-filled bar, an opposition leader who spent election day tracking reports of vote fraud by Putin supporters predicts Putin's victory will galvanize the opposition movement. We'll have a situation where a significant portion of the population does not recognize him as the legitimate president, he says. So this country will be led by someone who seized and usurped power, and the large number of citizens will fight against him. The night after the election, Xenia Sobchak was among the protesters arrested.
For supporters of Vladimir Putin like these people, and for his opponents, something seems to be changing. Many Russians, especially young people, are more interested in elections and in the choices they have. Tens of thousands of them, for example, volunteer to be poll watchers. Their leaders may be the same, but they are not. Jill Dougherty, CNN Moscow.
All right. Putin, ura! Okay. What I did say there was their leader may be the same, but they're not. And I think is going to be, my theme as I go along here. That as one person whom I respect very much, Masha Lipman, said to me I think it was yesterday, she's with the Carnegie Center in Moscow, and she said that it's very easy to look at the situation right now and say, well, what really has changed? Putin was reelected with a sizable proportion. He doesn't have to face reelection for another 6 years. The parliament is still basically in their control, United Russia, although they have, I think, some problems with their image right now. The courts are controlled by the Kremlin to a large extent. In other words, why worry? But she and others, and we can get into this a little bit later, feel that there are certain things that have changed, that the atmosphere has changed. The people, some of the people themselves have changed. And I think that's what I want to keep my eye on as I continue to watch Russia. So, going along, the opposition. You saw Navalny, who's a very interesting guy. He's an anti-corruption crusader, a blogger. He's very charismatic. When we went to that bar, I deliberately put the picture of the smoking woman who looks like a model, because there's a lot of kind of like, it's very cool to be in the opposition, even in the demonstrations. That's kind of part of it. In fact, some people have said that the opposition, a lot of the opposition people, let's call them the demonstrators who were on the streets, would not die for the opposition. That they were there interrupting, as one person said, interrupting their weekends to get together with their friends and hang out and demonstrate. That may be putting them down a bit too much, I think, but there was that element, so that's why it came out. Let's see, maybe we should come around to another piece. But how do we, okay. Anyway, so what, who are they? The opposition, one of the, I think, most notable facts about the opposition is that it is an extremely disparate group of people. You have everybody from traditional opposition people like Boris Nemtsov to all the way on the other end, Edward Limonov, the Bolshevik. I'm not quite sure how we even describe him, but kind of a wacky guy who's been around for a while, the neo-Bolshevik. You have Navalny, the anti-corruption guy. You have Sergei Udaltsov, who is a leftist, and everybody else in between. And you could say, and my original feeling was, they came together, but they did not come up with a cohesive political agenda. And that's really true. But some other people would argue that they didn't really even come together in the sense of coming together except for appearing in the same place at the same time. And they even voted on how the order was to be among the speakers on Facebook. That's one of the ways that they put together the speakers. So it was kind of a mishmash of everybody. Did it come out with any program? No. Did it come out, other than maybe, we hate Putin, let's stop corruption. But it did not come out with any program, and it didn't come out really with any one leader. And that is the big difference, I think, in this opposition movement and where it's going right now, compared to things like, let's say, Ukraine. In 2004, I covered the Orange Revolution, and there you had, you definitely had leaders, well-loved. Mr. Yushchenko at that point was well-loved, and Timoshenko. And there were definite leaders, and in other places we've had leaders. In Russia right now, there is no one person who's carrying the flag, and that's a problem to pull people together. They were quite inexperienced, I think, politically, a lot of the people on the streets, and fragmented, as I said. I'd like to play one piece, however, that this is almost for fun, because she's not one of the leaders, but she's one of the people who got a lot of attention. Her name is Xenia Sobchak.
If you want to tell us what we're seeing, I don't think most of us can hear any of them.
Oh, that's terrible. Then you know what?
audio.
I don't think it's, I'm sorry. Then if you can't hear it, it's not even worth showing it. But I will show you her picture, if nothing else. That's unfortunate that we don't have a speaker.
How many of you could not hear it?
Oh, I was going to say, I can hear it back here, but if it was really quiet.
Well,
you can hear it. Okay, I think it's.
then you know what? I
yeah.
have an idea. Why don't we play this for those of you who can kind of hear it? We can do that. They're very short, and at least you'll get an idea of what she looks like. And there's some fun pictures from Xenia's previous life, which will, I'm sure, enlighten us all. Come on. You do. Play. Eugene?
Yeah, just a little higher. There we go.
Is it going?
Yeah, no, just press now. Just a little bit higher until it turns into a mouse.
Oh, there we go.
You click on the little window.
In her previous life, Xenia Sobchak bared her soul and a lot more as Russia's version of Paris Hilton. A socialite for a reality show.
During my Paris Hilton years, I was always saying that I better do show business and I'll better do some stuff that people would call cheesy, but I wouldn't do something to betray my political takes.
Now Sobchak, daughter of political icon Anatoly Sobchak, former mayor of St. Petersburg, who helped launch Vladimir Putin's career in government, is trying to transform herself into a political commentator and opponent of Mr. Putin.
I was always feeling, something torn between my respect for how police my father and work together. Xenia says it was one key moment last year when everything changed for her, when she decided to move from the society pages into the political world.
It was September 24th when Vladimir Putin announced he, and not the current president Dmitry Medvedev, would be running for election again.
They decided to change Medvedev and Putin from Medvedev, and then they give out the result. This is not how it should work. People feel offended.
Sobchak exploits her fame to get her message across. Like in this video where, without using any names, she starts out by saying Russians should unite behind a benevolent leader. Sobchak says she's supporting billionaire candidate Mikhail Prokhorov.
I don't think that proper president. It sounds so incredible.
Some question Xenia Sobchak's new image and her political conversion. She was booed at this opposition rally. She thinks Vladimir Putin will be elected president, but Russia, she says, is no longer the same.
Like Orthodox, he would try to strengthen and tighten the system. But now, when the protests went out, it's not possible.
Political predictions from political change artist Xenia Sobchak. Jill Dougherty, CNN Moscow.
I thought that would wake us all up. Oh dear. Well, Xenia, I mean, what can you say? I've had debates about Xenia. Is she serious? I mean, one thing you can say about Xenia is she's very good at self-promotion. And just a couple of days ago, they launched an investigation of her and the way she grabbed a camera from a journalist and apparently stole the memory card or something like that. And but she's in Miami, so right now. So that's the opposition. And Navalny, I think, was on vacation in Mexico at one point during this. So you get the flavor. I mean, things are changing. And but just a P.S. That is one way. That is one way that the Kremlin right now lets off steam, which is to let people out. It's easier to let them go to Miami and do whatever they want than to send them to the gulag, because then at least they're kind of out of your hair and maybe people won't pay attention. So that actually is it's a technique used by the government to kind of let off steam. So on a more serious note, what does this mean? Well, there's an old style, let's call him dissident, Boris Kagarlitsky, whom I think probably some of you know. And he wrote in The Nation, just give you a couple of quotes. He says, the inability of the Russian opposition leaders to understand or learn anything is so phenomenal that even this humiliating defeat is unlikely to cause them to change anything in their actions. Their intention to keep around them, regardless of what would happen, the widest spectrum of forces precluded their ability to formulate even the semblance of a constructive program. And then he says it all boiled down to a personal insult of Putin, in whom they saw the sole and single cause of their ills and evils. Political slogans were limited to cries of theft and corruption. So, in a way, I think he's right. Now, whether that was a good technique to bring everybody into the tent and just get as many people on the streets as possible, I don't know. I mean, you can look at it, I think, two ways. Some people, let's say Lilia Shevtsova, who also is with Carnegie in Moscow, believes that you need essentially everybody in the tent. Others would say it just got so diffused, witness, there was nothing. But what do they do? What do they do now? I mean, I guess you could say they can continue civic action, because Navalny is a civic activist, and he can certainly continue his anti-corruption crusade. And then you can have kind of lower level, not national necessarily, but lower level political action. And there was a very interesting article in the New York Times just about a week or two ago about some of these younger candidates. Ellen Barry wrote the story, and I recommend it. But younger, and I mean like in their 20s and maybe in their 30s, who are running for office in Moscow region, and they're winning. And it's quite interesting because they have a variety of viewpoints. Some are anti-corruption people, some are environmental people. You know, it's a mishmash, but they're very young, and they're quite different, and they're very involved. And that could be a difference for the opposition. It could be something that they could really do. Now, how does Putin react? See, we'll just go a couple, like 10 more minutes maybe. So how does Putin react? Well, right now, I think you'd have to say it's a mixed bag, contradictory signals. On the one hand, you have the direct election of governors that happened under Medvedev and a little while ago. That is apparently going to be carried out, although the fine print is not clear on how that would work. But that was something that Putin took away, the direct election of governors. Now it's being reinstalled. Another thing that just happened this week, I think it was Friday, is they're making it easier to register political parties. That you need far fewer. In fact, you used to need 40,000 members to register, and now they just need 500. So that could be good for the opposition, because one of the hurdles was they needed a lot of people in order to get registered. But it also could create a lot of little groups. And once again, they can be fighting with each other. I'll give you those of you who are involved in Russian studies will, I think, understand this story. I went to a dinner the first night I was there with a number of people who really know Russia. They're Russians and they really know Russian. So the host said, you know, the last time we got together with some people like you, it devolved into this gigantic fight. And I'm hoping tonight that we can kind of, move on and talk about this and have some positive discussion. And within 2 seconds, these people, many of whom I know and I've known for years, began to fight with each other. Are the polls rigged? Are they real? Who's in charge of the opposition? I mean, it went on and on. And it was, I thought, a perfect example of what happens to the opposition. So anyway, we will see. Now, as you heard from Xenia, could Putin crack down? That's entirely possible. We haven't seen it yet completely. Some people were arrested, but I wouldn't call it massive arrest. There were no massive arrests. There were some people who stayed after the main demonstration, the day after the election. And, technically, I think you'd have to say they were breaking the law. They didn't have permission to be there, and they were arrested, but eventually they were let out. But it could get worse. Mr. Putin could decide to really get tough, not give permission to have demonstrations, which is what they, up to now, in this modern period of since September, since December, they have given permission. City fathers have given permission for these demonstrations. They could say no more demonstrations and stop giving permission. There could be. They could make it impossible once again for opposition people to appear in the media, the centrally controlled media. So far, they're letting some people appear, which is really quite surprising. Not all, but some. So looking down the road at what he might do, I think we have to watch it, because some of the steps that they're taking, I think you could call tactical, a reaction to what happened. But are others really strategic? Are we seeing some long-term approach, or are these kind of steps that they're taking to keep people happy, or maybe keep them a little bit off kilter, to not know what the government's going to do quite yet? That's a question, and I don't have the answer. I wanted to just kind of explore for a couple of minutes some things that people have been noting, and I think U.S.-Russian relations are a separate subject. Maybe we get into that in Q&A. I think it would be better. But oil prices are very, very important because Putin has made some promises, and for that he needs money. And how do you get money? They need oil prices to be higher. And one statistic that that I saw was about 5 years ago, the Russian budget could be balanced on oil at roughly $60 a barrel. Now they need $100 a barrel. So the price of oil continues to be extremely important for Russia and where it goes and how it gets its money to balance its budget. Now, I'll give you 3 people that either I talked to or I have read. 2 I talked to just within the last day, and 1 I read. And I think they have interesting views. Masha Lipman, I mentioned, from the Carnegie Foundation endowment. She said, again, it would be very easy to say that the situation remains the same. Putin's back in control and has control, and nothing changes. However, she said that there are undercurrents, as she put it, that there is an atmosphere of change, and that the elites are still loyal to Putin. But that could change because Putin has been to them an asset, a way of guaranteeing stability, which is what they want. If Putin is not able to guarantee stability, then he becomes a liability. And it is not guaranteed that they would stick with him if the place started to get very unstable. And as she put it, Putin is the only factor of stability, but he is weaker now. Now, for an opposite viewpoint, I talked with Margarita Simonyan. I knew her when she was a kind of a young journalist in Moscow, and now she's the chief editor of Russia Today. And I think you'd have to say she would be more on the government side, no question. But she made some very interesting points toward the end. She said, obviously, there's quite a large proportion of the population in the country that feels unhappy. They don't like the course of where the country is going. And it's in the air that somebody has to come and unite them. Now, of course, nobody has come to unite them. And she might take kind of a more negative view of this. In fact, she said, it's obvious that they, the people who don't like what's going on, are not anything like the majority of the population, but they are there. They do exist, and there's a movement, and a boiling sort of mood. Some portions of the population, some will come out and take advantage of that, but not in a good way. Now, of course, it could be hijacked by people, a populist who has a different agenda, not a democratic agenda. But I think it's very indicative that Margarita also feels this kind of zeitgeist, this change. And I have to say that I felt it too, although it's amorphous, kind of hard to define for me. And the final person is Alexei Maloshenko. He's a Carnegie again, but I think Carnegie is a very good organization in Moscow, has some really good people. And he said, I believe the most important issue will be whether the current ruling class realizes that Russian society has gone through fundamental and possibly irreversible changes, that the old way of governing the state has become ineffective and largely useless. While Putin has returned as president of Russia, Putinism, as a model of state governance designed to serve one person whose authority was based on a small clan of close associates, is no more. So, now, where do I stand? Well, I go back. You saw that stand up when I was walking through the crowd. And right before I did that, I talked to some young girls who were just there. Everybody had been bused to this pro-Putin rally. So, from their factories or their schools or whatever organization. But there were a few people, and one guy who said, "Looks like a good party. I'm here." And but mainly it was a very well organized demonstration. And yet, as I talked to these girls who were probably 20, maybe 19, 20, 21, I said, "So why are you here? You obviously support Putin." And this girl said, "Yes, we support Putin, of course, but the election, it probably really wasn't totally honest, and there probably was cheating. But I mean, he's good. I think he's good. I'll vote for him. And so there was an admission right there that it wasn't, as she wanted. It was not an election that she would necessarily be proud of. But what's the option? And I go back to another conversation that I had in that polling place where the woman was taking notes on the turnout and everything, the poll watcher. And there was a man that I talked to, supported Putin, and I asked him why he supported Putin. And he said, and I didn't even bring it up. I wanted to bring it up, but I didn't. And he said it. He said, we don't want Arab Spring here. And he said, Arab Spring and all that chaos, we had chaos. I don't want it. I'm not saying, he said, that I will even vote for Putin the next time. I don't know who I'll vote for. But he seems like the only person out there who can really guarantee that stability and the lack of chaos. And unfortunately, that has been the theme of Russia since the beginning of Mr. Putin. Since the beginning, since he was president. Let's go back to 2000. That has been the theme. And it continues to be. First it was Chechen terrorists and, attacks on Moscow. And now it's the Arab Spring and the social disruption and the chaos that can ensue from something like Arab Spring. But some people still feel that, better the situation of the devil they know than the devil they don't know. And I don't mean that Putin is a devil, but I mean the situation that they know is probably better than going into something where you see, let's say, the situation in Libya, let's say Gaddafi hounded on the streets, something that Vladimir Putin reacted very strongly to personally. He thought that was horrible. So Russians don't want that. And as long as the option seems to be chaos or Putin, then they will go with him. But I think there is something that has changed, and I think that the younger generation, and not only the younger generation, people want more than that. Now, what exactly do they want? I don't know precisely. But I do think they want more civic participation, and we're seeing it. More people actively out there. And that ultimately, I think, is really important, that people, participate, that they are not, let's say, uninterested in politics or in their society as a whole. And I think that will ultimately help to change the country for the better. So maybe I'll leave it there, and we'll see what questions you have, and I'd love to have a discussion.
Thank you very much. You've raised lots of very interesting issues. On the point about allowing parties to register with a few votes, of course, they're not allowing the parties to act jointly together. So this is a wonderful way of having 30, 40, 50 parties. I have also heard anecdotally, I was in Europe last week, some information that there is more of a crackdown now on some of the more established NGOs, but we'll have to see whether that lasts. I do have a question for you. So we heard during the campaign there was a great deal of anti-American rhetoric, right? It was Hillary Clinton who was paying the demonstrators in the streets. It was America trying to break Russia up. Did you encounter any of that in the sort of people you talked to? I mean, obviously not probably the opposition people, but the people of the pro-Putin rally when they realized who you were. Did you see any of that yourself, or was that not?
I personally did not see it, but it is certainly out there in the media. You hear it on TV. Whether people believe it, I have a tendency to think that some do believe it. I think especially people who do not live in big cities, who are not as well educated, who may be in the country, would probably believe that. They go back to Ukraine and the Orange Revolution, which they also feel was instigated by the United States. And, you do have right now, there are some plans or proposals to increase spending by the United States, funding of NGOs, pro-democracy groups. That's kind of in its nascent stage on Capitol Hill. but that is guaranteed to make people in Moscow very unhappy. I think, if you look at the educated, the, sophisticated, with it people in Moscow, they made fun of that. In fact, very quickly in the blogosphere, they were saying, joking around about the fact that Hillary Clinton pressed the button and they went out on the streets. They were laughing. But I do think that some people probably do believe it.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have time for questions, so please identify yourself. Andy.
Okay, Andy Steigman, SFS. Just a quickie on the balancing the Russian budget. I saw something recently that said not the $100, but $130 a barrel oil price would be needed within the next couple of years to keep the Russian budget in balance.
That may very well be. The statistic I saw was 100, but it's definitely over 100. And I think I should be probably more precise, but the point of that is that, practically a doubling of what it used to be.
Yeah.
And so that is one of the problems that they have. They haven't been able to diversify their economy. And the brain drain, I think, is significant. You go out to Silicon Valley. I was out there when Medvedev visited Silicon Valley. And, there are, tens of thousands of Russians in Silicon Valley. Why are they in Silicon Valley? Well, yeah, but also, I talked to some of them, and some of them said, we can start businesses here. If we were in Moscow, we would be, hounded by somebody who wants to shake us down. We would have a whole lot of bureaucracy, the hoops that we would have to jump through. And they don't believe in failure, as one woman said. They don't believe in failure in Moscow. And Silicon Valley is all about failing and trying again. So they like the mentality out there, too. But that's a problem for Russia if you don't have young people starting businesses. Yes.
I'm David Fishman, a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins SAIS, a sister institution of here. I have a confession, an observation, and a question, and they all sort of fit together. The confession is that I'm normally on MSNBC, so I'm seeing your books for the first time,
yes.
Although I've read them in JRL. And the observation, I think the fact that you're here getting some Russia education at Georgetown will be terrific for future news coverage that our media... The question is, do you think that perhaps we need to be a little more nuanced, most of our media in particular, in looking at the complexities of what's going on in Russia, looking at the context, than perhaps we are? And I thought you did a very good job today of laying out some of the diversities. But for example, Tom Remington is going to be giving a book talk this afternoon at the Kennan Institute on poverty in Russia, income inequality in Russia. And the fact, isn't that debate about income inequality, some of the same kinds of questions we're asking here, also a part of the Russian political process? And could our media perhaps do a better job of covering that kind of diversity in addition to just the horse race, or, is it Putin versus the opposition, as opposed to the texture of Russian society, such as Margarita Semenenko, whom I've also met and had the same reaction you did.
Well, there's absolutely no question. In fact, you are preaching to the converted. I absolutely believe that. But, I've been involved in Russian studies for a very long time. I studied Russian in high school, and I majored in college in it. And I'm very interested in the country, and I live there and studied there and worked there. And I was the bureau chief for 9 years. And it still was very hard to do that type of coverage. Number one, there is less interest in Russia. Let's just, absolutely less interest in Russia. The stories that get out there get out in a very, I would say, primitive Cold War fashion. We keep going back to the same words that we use. In fact, the other day, there was a little bit of an email chain in a certain unnamed company that I know quite well, where they referred to some of the opposition as dissidents. And, I just kind of reacted like a hot stove, because that is such an old Cold War word that I said, please don't even use this word anymore. It completely skews the conversation. Let's talk about the opposition. Let's not talk about dissidents, because then you see the gulag, And okay, Khodorkovsky aside, because he actually is kind of in the gulag. But truly, I think the problem is lack of interest, lack of space for reporting on Russia, and then the lexicon that we have from the Cold War is just so easy to use. I mean, look at the debate today about what Mitt Romney said about Russia. And then he was, saying Russia is the biggest geopolitical enemy of the opponent, enemy. I better be careful.
It's just like
check
what the
that
Russian
word.
doctrine, military doctrine
But check
says about it.
of the opponent enemy of the United States, geopolitical. And then Medvedev today, just a few hours ago, said, I would urge people who are running for office to use their heads, to use their reason, and to check their watches, he said, because it is not the Cold War, and it is 2012. So a little dig, to people who want to go back. But I think that's one of the problems, that it is our cultural, the images that we have in our heads are so Cold War, and the Cold War was so easy and in a way sexy to talk about. Spies, KGB, poisoning people. It's so easy and exciting to talk about that. How do you talk about a normal country? Is Russia a normal country? Do we talk about it like an average? Do we talk about it like France? No. We talk about it in a completely different way, and I think it's going to take a lot of time before we do that. And we're going to continue. If we don't change it, we'll be back to the same primitive black and white type of coverage. Anyway, end of rant.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yes.
Yeah, Dan Burkhardt, Associated here and other places. One specific question and one speculative, and I'll put this in the context. I was an OSCE observer for the 2004 election, at which time it was on the books. To be valid, the election had to have 50% of the electorate turnout. Mm-hmm. And they did all sorts of flip-flops to make sure people showed up, to include passing out tickets to the latest Lord of the Rings film that had just arrived. Since that time, they've dropped it off, but the specific question, what was the percentage of registered voters that turned out for the election?
It had to be 50%. I'm not quite sure I know the exact number, but it had to be.
Harley, do you know that?
50%. That's dropped. Yeah. They changed that before the election for the same fear that if not 50% of the election turned out.
I don't know. I'm looking at Hurley. You might know.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I think it was close to 50, but I don't know if it was 50.
Yeah.
There's still the tradition.
And what is there a minimum percent now?
There's no minimum.
There's no minimum.
No, that's done away with, but still interesting. And the speculative, tomorrow Putin gets on a helicopter for his latest heroic sports endeavor, and the helicopter crashes. What does that do to the opposition? Life after Putin.
Oh, wow. Well, if it happens tomorrow, I think they're in a pickle. They don't have anybody. Who do they have? I don't think there's anybody right now who could quickly step into his shoes. I mean, you look at people like Boris Nemtsov, who've been around, the people who've been politicians, but they're not getting support from the people. So I honestly think they would be врасплох, as you would say. I don't know what they would do. And I do think, at that point, a lot of Russians would probably rally to the country and hope for stability and probably support the next person, who would, of course, be Medvedev.
Yeah. You probably get Sergei Ivanov playing Alexander Haig.
Hopefully with the same result.
Yeah. That's what you saw the BBC series.
So I mean, that does come to the question. So, as far as you could tell, there wasn't any single person whom the opposition, when you talked to the different parts of the opposition, said, I think this person should be the president.
No, it's really true. I mean, a number of people speak very highly of Prokhorev, but Prokhorev, is not a politician, and he just kind of appeared. He's smart. He's a businessman. He's made a lot of money. Sophisticated. He seems to be quite impressive, but he has never been in politics. And I don't know how that oligarch would work with average people. I think for people who want to make money, and the younger crowd probably would like him because he is an example of what they might be able to do. But for the people who are out in the countryside, who are poorer, it could cut the opposite way. They may think he raped and pillaged Russia, and why should we have somebody like that? Oligarchs aren't exactly popular on everybody.
Could Navalny grow into an effective leader?
Navalny I found very interesting. When I interviewed him, he has a lot of charisma. I was struck by that. I mean, he's very tall, well built, interesting looking, and organized. And he has this kind of, I hate to say, you meet Bill Clinton, and he has that kind of animal charisma. And Navalny has this interesting vibe about him. He really does. I don't know all his background. Some people thought that he was a stalking horse, in some odd way, even though he's an opposition person, because there's never, just kind of like Prokhorev was supposed to be a stalking horse for the Kremlin, quietly, who knows. But I think he would need some more experience. He'd have to do something. He'd have to be political. He'd have to be involved.
You have to stand for something more than organizing demonstrations.
Yes, and his thing was anti-corruption, and that's a very strong theme right now. But is that enough?
But he's also a nationalist, right?
He is a nationalist.
And he does appeal to the nationalist voters. So
very right-wing.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So we don't know all of that right-wing side to him.
Yeah.
Cindy Zabaloff, I wonder about your sense of, you were just mentioning that, the ultra-nationalists, how much of an impact they were having, and what do you think their future is? I mean, the ones that basically want to go back to the old Soviet Union territory.
I think it has been more diffused since a few years ago. I think that there is, there are certainly the people who are ultra-nationalists who believe Russia first, the skinheads, don't want anybody who's not Slavic. That absolutely exists, and it's kind of scary. But I do think that there's also kind of a Russian pride that has crept into the discussion that kind of, in a good way, mitigates that among other people. And I think there are some young people who would actually like to be proud of Russia, people in Silicon Valley, but at this point can't quite stay. So I am not an expert on the ultra-nationalists, but it doesn't feel as black and white as it was before, that they're over here and they want the old Soviet Union. There's nostalgia, but I think that there is another generation that looks at Russia as the future. And some of them supported Medvedev. I mean, that's kind of the sad subtext of a lot of this. There were a number of people who supported Medvedev, felt that he was this kind of new type of Russian who could bring Russia into the modern world. And, he's another generation, he has an iPhone, what more do you need? But seriously, and he got along with Obama, which is not a joke, he really does get along with Obama. But, I don't know, the reality was revealed to them on September 24th, when, as they said, it was revealed that Putin is going to run. And a lot of those people said, well, was it a joke? Was this, tandem of two people, together in this just a joke? Why does Medvedev have to step aside? Couldn't he run? And they felt deceived and hurt. And that was really a turning point for a lot of people, the anger that they felt when Medvedev was, in a way, kind of insultingly pushed aside, and Putin was back. So...
Imagine how Medvedev feels.
Yes. The true story may never be told.
Any other questions?
My name is Xenia, and I actually interned at Carnegie twice, so I appreciate your references. But, you're talking about the brain drain and people in Silicon Valley thinking like, oh, I want to be proud of Russia, but I can't. which is like exactly how my family feels, unfortunately. Do you think that there will be some time when it will actually get better, not just like incrementally?
You know, that's a question I've been asking myself since I was about 13. But you know, I am ultimately an optimist. I mean, let's talk about the Cold War. You know, I remember when I studied in Leningrad back in 1969, and it felt like World War II, and it was a pretty closed place. And I go to Moscow, and you know, Xenia's in Miami, and I'm running around Moscow, and I know Moscow is not all of Russia, but there are a lot of places, you know, where you can have a pretty normal life, and if you want to get on the internet, so far, you can get on any site you want, and you can say pretty much anything you want, in contrast to China, on the internet. So I think there are huge changes. I think there are huge changes. Now, where it goes, will Russia be able to be as competitive as it should be in the world without a chip on its shoulder? That's the thing that I think is really sometimes so sad. And this is my personal opinion. It's totally my personal opinion. But, you know, the attitude sometimes is, well, maybe we're not doing exactly what we should be, but look, we're special, you know, or you guys are too critical, or just kind of throwing it back, as opposed to kind of what maybe a European country would do, which is say, hey, maybe we have room to improve, you know? There's very little of that self-reflection among the leadership and ability to admit that maybe there are some things that could be improved. I do think, you know, in fairness, President Putin has talked about income disparity, education, and, you know, a variety of other endeavors that they have to try to improve society. That's true. But there is that continuing chip on the shoulder. I'm not quite sure why it continues, but it's still there.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much, Jill.
Yeah. I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.